Okay, so yes, today is our third lecture on synapsids, but then also the EPME, which is the End-Permian mass extinction. There is some really nice paleo art there showing you kind of a brutal scene maybe of one of these synapsids. This is Lystrosaurus, one of those dicynodonts with a beak and tusks and no teeth. That's a really abundant herbivore during this time period. Mass extinction intervals are really, really, really interesting because they are these massive perturbations, like we talked about in lab, times of great disturbance to how biological and ecological systems are working. Usually there's a lot of species level extinction, species level death, but there's always survivors. And that's another kind of part of the story. And so what can we learn from all these mass extinctions all together? It's really cool. Just to recontextualize a little more, here's our geological timescale that you guys have been looking at now for weeks. And so the Phanerozoic eon at the top and then 3 eras underneath that. We are now in our lectures about to cross from the Paleozoic into the Mesozoic. And so there's a bunch of the organisms you guys have met along the way. I think it's interesting to think about that we've already done in terms of like absolute time. So the years ticking by, Earth spinning around the sun. More than half of the time of the Phanerozoic is just by itself the Paleozoic. So much of the things, like I was just saying to you guys about your projects, that you might be thinking of when you think of paleontology, Stegosaurus or some crazy bird on an island, that's all going to come later. But what I think is really important is that you've now met so many of these fossil lineages and actually seen so many of the splits amongst today's vertebrate diversity go all the way back down into this Paleozoic. So if we want to talk about turtles, we want to talk about sharks, we want to talk about the bird line, we can do that in the Mesozoic and the Cenozoic. But the splits between a lot of those are way back by the Paleozoic or deep into the Paleozoic. And in fact, just because I think this is fun and beautiful and like a nice chance to catch up, just reflect for a second, talk to your neighbors. Who's up here on this slide? Who do you remember all these faces? If I really forced you, could you like name all these things or at least kind of get a vibe of what they were? I don't expect the answer to that is yes, of course. But yeah, are you like, I don't remember that one at all? Preferably fishes that is next to the dump or hundreds. We got our sickly fishes. It's no accident that Sacabambascus is basically all by itself under the Ordovician. That's a special little thing for you guys. But all right, we're going to keep going. And I hope that was nice to just think about these animals. They're all kind of fishy looking, except for some of them, I guess. And then they're super not fishy looking, starting to get interesting. But I really want you to take in that all the splits of the major clades of vertebrates are back in the Paleozoic almost completely. And so here's what I mean by that. Here's the phylogeny of living fishes that we've been using to like learn about the early vertebrate splits, our cyclostomes and our gnathostomes, our osteichthyans and chondrichthyans, our actinopterygians, sarcopterygians within osteichthyes. And then I just put that Paleozoic timeline as that weird green cloud on the phylogeny. And so there is a lineage that goes to that gar fish we can trace, and then a lineage to all these other fishes, but that split between those two is back in the Paleozoic. And so, yeah, split. These are now kind of getting to be separate lineages. We've moved on from that common ancestor in terms of time. The same is true if we go up onto land with those tetrapods. So even there, break that magpie up into a bunch more stuff. Splits between groups of amphibians, splits between groups of reptiles, mammals off by themselves. These are also all splits that happened way back in the Paleozoic. In the Carboniferous or the Permian, go back even farther down there, the Devonian, things like that. Pretty cool. And then today is a really big day in this lecture because there's our EPME, our End-Permian mass extinction. The End-Permian mass extinction is, of course, affecting all kinds of life forms, but we've been focusing in on the synapsids. And so you guys have seen a bunch of animals, like the Masukians and the Gorgonopsians especially, that we are very comfortable saying are victims of the End-Permian mass extinction. We find their fossils kind of below this line. We do not find their fossils above that line. Whereas other of these clades, in terms of the whole clade itself, some members must have survived the event, But within each of these branches, the dicynodonts, these things, Anomadontia, these cynodonts are mammal cousins. There are definitely species that go extinct at this boundary. And so it's a really, really, really exciting and important thing to study. It's one of the most important things we can study. You guys saw this already this week when we were in lab. Here are what I would call the major mass extinctions. The big five are the end of the Ordovician, end of the Devonian, end of the Permian, end of the Triassic, end of the Cretaceous. Those were the ones identified back in 1981, those big five. You'll see I've thrown in a couple more that I think are worth talking about. That's just my opinion, though. Like we learned in lab, there's like up to 24 of these giant mass extinction events. But one thing that's really not controversial, and again, you guys read the paper, you saw it in lab, is that of all these different perturbations, disturbances that affected the evolution of life on Earth, this one, everybody kind of is like, that's the bad one. That's the worst one. And so here we are today. That divide halfway through the Phanerozoic that separates the Paleozoic era from the Mesozoic era. Mass extinctions are not the same, and the End-Permian is a real hallmark. So let's talk about it. You've seen this art already. This extinction is sometimes called the Great Dying, which is such an awful title for a thing. Here are some different organisms. Some are vertebrates, of course. Some are not vertebrates. They're invertebrate animals, but these are all animals. These are all lineages of organisms that are victims of the extinction. Some of these have very deep roots that go through a lot of the Paleozoic era, many periods, some of them. But ultimately, they are extinct at that boundary and no longer continue. Everything on these images here. Talk to your neighbors. What are some characteristics of these organisms that seem different? What are some things that maybe seem the same? But I think really focus on the things that are different here, because what they have in common is they're all victims of extinction at almost the same time. So go ahead and spend some time chatting about that. Right. Yeah. I think it's like a lot of things that are it's like always oh, that's what you're saying. It's like it's not like so many. There's all this kind of like to just hand what things and things for the a lot of other things. But yeah. Yeah, so yeah. All right, what are some things going on with these? They're not totally randomly selected, but there's a lot more than just this that goes extinct. But what can we talk about? Yeah, Trevor, what is your group talking about?
So correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure that our trilobite and our scorpion thing.
Yeah, these are those sea scorpions we barely talked about, but this is a nice old. Yep. What about them?
They're both arthropods. They're both.
Yeah. I mean, that the extinctions, there's vertebrates and mollusks and echinoderms and arthropods and sponges. I mean, everything has species that go extinct for sure. So these two are arthropods, jointed leg things like insects and spiders and stuff. Yep. But what are things what are groups talking about? Yeah, Cody.
We were talking about how like 4 out of the 5 things that you picked up on the slide are things in the ocean.
I did pick a lot of ocean stuff.
Yeah, and you asked me about like an extinction, I would think about land stuff dying.
Yeah.
Instead, like the ocean, they're chilling in there, but it could have been some sort of like cascading effect, like that hints of like the food chain. That's kind of what we're thinking. Like if smaller things die, then bigger things die, and they can eat smaller things. And
So you're talking about some mechanism stuff here of interactions, ecological interactions, and you could have breakdowns in those interactions, and that be a thing that affects the likelihood of of species like going extinct. I definitely think like we have water organisms and we have land organisms. If you're trying to deduce what happened a long time ago at some geological event, if all the extinction is in the oceans or if all the extinction is on land, that might constrain what you think could have been the cause. This is one where we definitely have a lot of ocean extinction. We definitely have a lot of terrestrial or like land extinction. What other things people talking about? In the middle here, what are we doing? Yeah, Katie.
Between the trial by sea swirling, it seems that 70 boats on benthic.
There's definitely organisms like this one and this one that so you use the word benthic, so organisms that are on the bottom of the ocean. That's definitely true. But there's definitely free swimming ocean animals that go extinct. There's animals that can move. There's animals that sit there their whole life in one spot that go extinct. So we say sessile for organisms that stay in one spot for their whole life cycle, or motile, moving organisms. Ocean and water, benthic and water column, moving and not moving. What's going on up here with these two? What's that? Definitely carnivores, definitely herbivores. I picked these images because I thought they were a decent representation of a whole bunch of things that have nothing to do with taxonomy, even though there's definitely arthropods up there. Nothing to do with taxonomy, more like all different parts of different ecosystems are affected. A big herbivore on land, a little herbivore on land, a tiny filter feeder at the bottom of the ocean, a tiny fish that swims in the water. These are all ecologically very different, but they're all going extinct at the same time. That requires an incredibly remarkable explanation. You can imagine how if you do this to an ecosystem, you might lose your top predators or something, but you wouldn't necessarily lose the bottom of the food chain. In this case, we have memberships in the extinction category from everywhere. It's really compelling, really interesting. Something very dramatic has to be happening to Earth systems during this time to cause that level of extinction. That's so well spread out, almost not selective at all. There are certain things, I shouldn't say not selective at all. There's certain things that are predictors of your extinction, but there's levels of extinction in all different categories of organism. I think that's pretty remarkable. They all go. There's my big red X. You guys know, though, that like that pattern of turnover, that pattern of loss was something that was picked up on a really long time ago by like 1800s geologists when they were first mapping rocks all over the world. That's why they even bothered calling all of this the Paleozoic and then all of this a different thing, because they could see a difference. And then come around to the 1980s, here's a revised version of the graph you guys saw in lab. This one's from 1984. If this is that same thing you've been talking about, a raw reading of the number of families of marine invertebrates, I would say if you had to tell me like 2 or 3 things about this line for 500 million years, you'd be like, that seems like a big deal. It goes up, but there's one part where it doesn't go up. Remarkable, right? It's really a compelling thing. And so we talked about it in the lab a little bit, that it's only been in the last like 25, 30 years maybe of like really good extinction science, because the science of mass extinctions is only a few decades old, really. We didn't find the asteroid that killed T-Rex. We didn't find that hole until the 90s. The culprit, the ultimate cause of so much of the extinction that happens at the end of the Permian is now really well constrained. And most people, I think, would be very, very comfortable saying, really, it all boils down ultimately to a giant, large igneous province, one of those lips, that is in what is now Siberia. So you're looking at a map here. This is like the Arctic Ocean in northern Russia. And there are these mountains you can go see in Russia. And that black rock is literally the lava from these eruptions. And so that's like a fine thing that we can line up the timing of this large igneous province and that extinction. But like we talked about in lab, what are all the proximate kill mechanisms? How does this actually happen? Why does a lot of volcanic activity on one part of the world lead to changes everywhere for all different kinds of organisms? The point is that we can definitely measure it. Again, you guys have seen this already. This isn't new information for you. We looked at this in lab this week. No matter how you measure it, or no matter who measures it, that End-Permian is always the one that is the highest level of like taxonomic extinction, whether you're talking about genus or species. And then for people who are thinking more ecologically instead of taxonomically, the End-Permian oceans and land look very different in the Triassic than they did in the Permian. There's a huge change in those systems. And so if we go back to this table, again, that you guys saw in lab, there's all these candidates of different perturbations, different events. Are they maybe mass extinction events? Which ones would qualify if I wanted to draw a line for mass extinction events? And I mean, really, this one's very different from the others. Part of that's because it's so well studied, but part of it's also because it was so severe. End-Permian, is there a lip? 100% yes. There's a big, large igneous province right at the boundary. Is there an associated impact structure? There's some candidates, so that's kind of spicy. I personally don't think it's very convincing that these have much to do with anything. One's in Australia, one's in Antarctica, but still, like, the answer is still maybe. Most of them, it's no. 10 degrees Celsius of global warming is a lot of increase to the average temperature of the surface of the planet. That's what that means. Ocean acidification? Probably. Don't you love the probably? Question marks, question marks. This one's a probably, this one's a possibly, this one's a probably. Anoxia? Yes. Some sort of shift in the carbon isotopes that let us know primary productivity is collapsing. At least 0.8 parts per mil, or sorry, -8 parts per mil, a shift. It's one of the highest numbers in this whole column. How about notes and other causes? We have evidence for acid rain. We have evidence for toxic metal poisoning. We have evidence for ultraviolet damage from the sun, like radiation damage. It's rough, you guys, right? This is tough. So how are all these things related to each other? How are they actually going to be causing some kind of extinction is a really interesting thing to think about. Again, we saw this in lab too, but it's fun to contextualize it for you guys now that we've been talking about this time period for so long. The End-Permian mass extinction has, after the Cambrian anyway, the highest bar. If you remember from the lab, this bar was just counting the genus extinction percentage. It's the highest one. There's maybe some impact structures. There is a Siberian trap, so there is an igneous province, and it's when Pangea is forming. And so I liked that you guys spent the time you spent in lab talking about this graph, because there's obviously times in Earth history, those graphs up there at the top are showing you like the volume of lava from some of these large igneous provinces in the past. This one is not the biggest one, but it does seem like whenever we have one and the continents are configured as one giant landmass, there and there and there and there, we have relatively elevated levels of extinction. That's one of these things that is a pattern. We can observe it, and then that lets us build new ideas, new hypotheses to go test it, to go talk about it. Anyway, End-Permian, rough stuff. So what is a large igneous province and what's actually happening here? Take a second, talk to your neighbors. This is just a really nice image from Harvard that was talking about something in the modern world, but I really like it as an image for you guys to be considering, like what it means to live on this active planet. What are we looking at in this image? What can you infer from this image? So what, just totally in a basic way, what are we even looking at in this image? A cross section of the Earth, right? Of an eyeball. No, of the Earth. Okay. So we got the sun over here. We can assume this is Earth. It's fine. So, okay, so we got the sun over here. We got this, the surface, which is where you and I have our whole, like, basically lived experience. One of my favorite things about this graph, not this graph, I'm sorry, about this image is like top of cloud, bottom of ocean. It's like that whole like film, that layer of the earth that is actually inhabited by organisms. If you think about the volume of the earth, is like this, an orange rind is way thicker on an orange than like the layer we all actually live in. Deepest ocean, highest sky is a thin thing all around this big radioactive lava rock that we live on. So there's something to think about here. Just so you guys know, this figure is from a paper, if I remember right, that's talking about like island building in Indonesia. So this is supposed to be like one of these islands like Java or Sumatra with volcanoes all over it. These are all volcanic islands. And so anybody got any words in their brain for what all this orange is? Mantle, people heard words like that before. So there's a lot of layers to the earth. So this hot mantle movement within this mantle is what drives the continents to move around. So there's movement here. Here's one piece of crust going under another piece of crust. That's part of what's leading to these volcanoes. That's cool. That's what's happening right now in Indonesia and lots of places all around the Pacific. But what I like about this is it's kind of like, I showed you guys Yellowstone in class, thinking about, or in lab, thinking about these like whirls and eddies inside the earth that like just sometimes kind of make these magma chambers and sometimes come up to the surface and then pop, or pop, you get a little volcano and like it's in the news and it's the biggest thing that happens in a decade. But if you think about it from like the Earth's perspective, like this little like, it's just this little thing. And so what I really like about this is when we think about extinction, we're talking about changes to this little film that all the life is in. And those changes sometimes can come from out here. You often think about them coming from somewhere out there. Most of the movies, they come from somewhere out there. But a lot of the time, it's just this system's doing whatever it's doing. And sometimes it's like, and it just ruins everything for us. It's really interesting, right? And sort of like humbling and crazy. So some of these structures here, they have a name. There's these things called mantle plumes. So I am no expert in geophysics or like how the earth works, but imagining sort of like when you guys have a pot of boiling water and there's like heat in the middle and then it rises and then spreads out like this. You have this like rising heat source that are like, these things are very poorly understood. Every time I talk to geologists and I'm like, but wait, how do we like predict plumes or like know why they start or like, why is Yellowstone like it is? Why is Hawaii like it is? They're all like, we can tell you all about how they work, but we don't really understand where they come from, why they happen. So as they happen though, they might run up into a plate. Sometimes they bust through in a lot of places and you get these flood basalts. That's kind of what leads to these things that we were talking about in class, like those extinction those lips, those large igneous provinces, where you just have a lot leaking out onto the surface. Other times it's a lot more contained. And so as the plate moves over it, you just get these volcanoes. And so Hawaiian Islands are one of these. Yellowstone hotspot is one of these. So sometimes you get it like this, sometimes you get it like that, and it's a little more contained. The thing I like for you guys to be remembering is that like maybe this fish is evolving and it's getting limbs from its fins, and there's all this biology happening on the surface, and at any time there could just be like a that like is gonna change how stuff works for a while. I think that's really intense. So here is a piece of paleo art that's like trying to show us what it might have looked like in the middle of these traps, in the middle of Russia, back in the Permian. Again, humanity has never been alive while one of these has happened. The last time one of these happened was 14 million years ago. So there's apes in Africa 14 million years ago, but they're not us yet. And it happened here. It happened in like Oregon, Washington, Idaho. All the black lava in the western part of our state and the eastern parts of Oregon and Idaho, of Washington, sorry, are the last time this happened. But that one was much smaller than this one in the Permian. And so like, I don't know, you saw this in lab, but now you're seeing it in like a better, bigger screen with like a dark room. Does it look awesome? You want to go? So one thing that I think is a really common thought, a common question, I certainly had questions like this when I was in college and people were talking about extinctions. And I'm like, okay, I kind of get some of the details of like an asteroid impact kills a lot of stuff. But like, why would volcanic eruptions that just keep happening affect stuff all over the planet? And there's a lot of very good geochemistry and a lot of very good ground truthing in real fossils and real sedimentary rocks all over the world and some igneous rocks in Russia that let us build this pattern of what happened. And so in the paper you guys read, here's, I guess, the next day when it's like cooled off a little bit. In that paper you guys read, one of the figures, because they talk about every extinction event in that paper, is this like sort of summary flow chart of trying to get these big ideas together of this mass extinction. And so this is that figure. It's on canvas in the paper you guys read. And so we have our Siberian traps eruptions. The existence is there. Great. Down here we have extinctions in the oceans, extinctions on land. A lot of other stuff's going on this chart. I want you guys to spend a few minutes now. You're not going to know what all this stuff is. You might know what some of it is. Talk to each other, make sense. See if you can follow a couple loops all the way around to be like, I get what is being said here. I get what the loop is. Okay, we're going to spend a few minutes on this chat with your neighbors.
Which then as you get through is story and this is teachers. This almost kind of reminds me of this is I guess like whatever it is, it's almost the yeah, it's also so says everywhere. Extinction. Yeah, I get what you're saying. So yeah. So you know what you do? I see brains. What do you do? Just big soup. I read it. Either go to store. It's so yeah. Oh yeah. It's a very nice.
Okay, so there's a lot of fun stuff, fun in quotes going on up here. Obviously, every arrow in and of itself contains, I think, probably questions that you might have. But can any group maybe just pick one of these arrows and like walk us through it? You don't have to know everything, of course. You haven't learned any of this probably, but like, yes, Brooklyn.
I was looking at the very middle one first.
Ooh, low-hanging fruit has been grabbed. So walk us through that middle one.
We have toxic metal emissions, and therefore toxic metals everywhere. There's poisoning, which leads to death.
The volcano shoots a bunch of mercury into the sky. The mercury ends up in your tissues. You die. Okay, so that makes sense. Great. Emitted in the body. Enough of that keeps happening. Stuff on land, stuff in the sea, extinct. Okay, what about another group, a different one of these arrows? Yeah, Carmen.
Siberian eruptions goes to, I think that's sulfide emissions.
Okay, yeah. So or just, I mean, yes, it is, but like sulfur, it's a lot of different kinds of sulfur compounds. Okay, go ahead.
So there's no like plants and they start shut down and that leads to death.
Okay, so does that make sense to you?
If there's no plants, then there's no herbivores. Herbivores can eat plants, carnivores can eat herbivores.
The idea that the plants get shut down makes sense, that, or photosynthesis maybe gets shut down. So like the plankton that are photosynthesizing or the green plants on land that are photosynthesizing, you lose the base of your food pyramid, sure. So things you guys might not know, volcanic darkness, the actual eruptions themselves, these types of gases that come out of volcanoes, they happen at any volcanic eruption, really. And if you have a big volcanic eruption, you'll get a lot of them. What they do is they're just incredibly reflective. And so the sun's energy every day just like hits them in the upper atmosphere and bounces off. So heat that the earth would have received, energy, photons the earth would have received that plants could have caught with their chlorophyll, just bounces back off into space. So you get like a general darkening, but that cooling is another factor that will happen. The climate will get colder. And we can see through different extinction events that like you might have a very short term, meaning a matter of a couple years, even after a volcanic eruption that we've seen. There's a couple of volcanic eruptions from the 1800s that like scientists watched happen in Indonesia, and everybody around the world, it got cold for a couple summers afterwards because all those sulfides were still up in the atmosphere. And that was just one volcano going in like 1893 or something. So a short-term pattern from that gas of cooling and photosynthetic shutdown. But what if it's not one volcano for 1 year, for one time? What if it's never stops erupting for 60,000 years of time? Okay, who could pick a different one? Yeah, Colton.
We have cooling sulfur line, but then we blow associate a couple of other.
Yeah. Which one? Which one should we pick?
I can try it.
All right, okay, so carbon dioxide, famous, abundant, currently in this room, not a problem. Okay, go ahead.
So there's nothing white box that don't.
The white boxes, I could just block those if I wanted to, but then you guys would be like, what's behind those? The white boxes are like things that geologists can get measurements for, and like they can provide evidence. So they're like, this doesn't like lead to a different strontium ratio. I mean, that's just something we can measure. But okay, but what else happens with CO2?
Also about it, the warming from which leads to ocean and non-CO2, right? I guess it leads directly to ocean rather than as a result.
So one general phenomenon is just that warm water holds, just as a physical property, less oxygen, dissolved oxygen. Warmer water will hold less than cold water. So if you just generally turn the temperature up on the oceans, you are going to reduce, not to zero or something, but you are going to relatively reduce the amount of oxygen that's even available. And those deep ocean areas that are always low oxygen are going to rise up into the shallower parts of the ocean. So you need to be cycling with the atmosphere where photosynthesis is happening to have oxygen at all, if that makes sense. Okay. So one global warming arrow, which this is a hilariously huge box, and you could put a lot more arrows on this, goes to ocean anoxia. One goes straight to extinction. One goes straight to extinction because of all kinds of other ways warming and temperature changes can affect organisms' ability to reproduce, organisms' ability to migrate, organisms' ability to track their food, who knows what. But anytime you have changes to some big physical parameter like the temperature, you're going to have this trend. One thing I think is interesting, this type of gas emission from the volcano leads to a temperature change that is very, very long lasting. When a volcano goes off, when there's an, if you imagine like putting off these clouds of gases that are pure instead of like a big cocktail, this one's going to make the Earth pretty cold, but for a really short time. This has a really low residence time in the atmosphere. It'll come out pretty quick. This one doesn't go away for quite a long time. Usually like the weathering of mountains and things like that, it will in the long term draw it down, binding to rocks. So CO2 will heat things up and that'll last a lot longer time. And so extinction patterns will have these patterns of like cold and then really hot for a while. Interesting. This one takes a while to build up. This one happens fast, doesn't last that long. This one sticks around a long time once it gets going. So kind of like a curve for temperature. Remember those ecosystems after the extinction where they were like. So thermogenic gas emissions are a similar thing. This is just meaning lots of other gases that can cause global warming. So a really popular one you guys might know about already is methane. Very easy to make, very simple. It's a carbon and 4 hydrogens. Also an incredibly powerful trapper of solar radiation once it comes in. So keeping greenhouse heat from the sun on the planet's surface. And so it does a lot of the same things. Polluting ocean acidification that CO2 kind of does too. Anybody else want to take any other ones? Yeah, Indigo. Yeah, just some of the nitrate things. So what do they do? Oh, so just making the rain itself literally acidic as the water that's falling every day and the clouds that form every day are just in those smoggy mixes of these different gases that are maybe not doing anything in terms of like capturing heat or reflecting sunlight, but they are getting in the water and they're making the water just acidic as it rains down. And so that obviously has a direct impact on like just organisms that are out there. Usually these acids for acid rain aren't like, it's not cartoon melt your face acid. But if you're a plant and your leaf is getting rained on all the time, it's just going to eat away slowly. The other thing that's interesting about these gases is there's this. What are we talking about here? So the ozone is like this layer of O3 that's like way, 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 way up high. And if you put some of these loose, they're not usually like loose ions, you guys, but if you put the compounds with these type of elements in it, they will bind to that and then you'll lose your ozone. And all that really does, the sun has been sitting there blasting you in the face forever. And now like your shield is just less. So more of the sun's radiation can get to the surface. I always think about Dr. Evil, increasing the rate of skin cancer, but like over a long time, that's maybe a significant effect. And we're going to talk about that. So what I really like about this chart is because each one of these, you can each individually be like, oh, yikes. Then you have to imagine like a population of organisms doing whatever they're trying to do to live their lives and eat their food and find their mates. And you have all this kind of stuff happening in the background. One or two of them for their particular habitat is going to be the most important. Others maybe don't matter at all, but they're all sort of connected to this ultimate cause. Yeah, Cody.
Can I ask what increased oceanic SR86 is? Is that like isotopes?
Yes, these are different isotopes of strontium, and I think it's like a signal that we can get because we're seeing like more acidic rain is melting through like limestone mountains faster than normal rain. And so then we can see a shift in like the strontium in the oceans because the only way the oceans are getting that strontium is because it's washing off the continents. So like geologists can like measure things like that and show you things like that. So that's why it's on there. That's one. It's one. It's one way. Yeah, for sure. So that's the thing with something like continental weather is like CO2 will also infect that also. But anyway, we don't have to get into those details unless you guys want to do geology instead of paleo. So here I want to show you this one example. This example like freaks me out because I think it's so wonderful. So this is a guy named Jeff Benka. I went to grad school with him, so that's why one of the reasons I like this study so much. This is the study of his paper. I'll let you read the title real quick. We don't have any living plants today that are like that species of plant was alive 252 million years ago when the extinction happened. That's okay. We do have plants like this pine that's like a pretty good proxy for the kind of seed plants that were around at the end of the Permian. Jeff took baby seedlings of these pines and just pretended they had different levels of no ozone above them and grew them in greenhouses. When we look all around the world, back in the fossil record, so a paleobotanist can look in the fossil record, here's where we have fossils of forest decline. That's a red dot. Here's the black dots are where we have actual fossils of pollen. Pollen is really hardy. It's got a really tough coating on it. So if pollen falls into a lake and ends up in a sandstone or a mudstone, somebody can dig and look under a microscope and pull out the pollen from the Devonian, from the Carboniferous, from all throughout Earth history. We can get a really good record of plants by looking at pollen. So here's where we find malformed pollen. Here's where we find decline in forest. That could be something like the rivers that used to be very like slow and windy are getting faster and more violent, probably because the banks are gone, because there's no trees or plants holding the banks steady, kind of looking like the pre-Cambrian all of a sudden, or pre-Devonian, I should say. And here's where we have both. If you got a tree symbol and a black dot, that means both of these things are there. So there's a map of Pangea. It's like a survey showing you like, okay, there's good indication of forest collapse all over the place. Different kinds of trees on different continental masses, but similar patterns of forest loss are knowable. Okay. Here are actual pollen. This is what a pollen looks like that's healthy. These are all fossils of pollen that are malformed. The gamete, pollen is the male part, like the sperm basically of the plant. These are literally fossils of malformed pollen. And then here's a bunch of pollen that Jeff got in the greenhouse when he shot radiation at real pine trees. Pretty fun, huh? Even though it's not fun at all. So, okay, the pollen is getting messed up experimentally in a way that we can also see empirically in the fossil record. Fossils of mutated pollen certainly look like lab mutated pollen. The other thing he did was you can think about this is the sperm, right? These are the male gametes. How about cones, which are the female parts of the plant? Here's like a plant going through the stages of becoming a healthy female pine cone. And then he gave different levels of UV treatment down here, 0 to 93, whatever this is, kilojoules on a square meter, I guess, in a day. And if you give it 0, 7.2, 54, 57, you, at a really low level of radiation, have what he calls cone death. If you just radiate that, the pine tree is fine. It keeps doing photosynthesis. It keeps growing, but the female parts never actually form at like 7.2 kilojoules per meter per day or whatever. And some of the evidence we have would suggest that back in the Permian, the actual levels the plants were getting were like way up here. But you only need this much to make it so that the female parts never form and that the male parts don't, like you can imagine sperm without their tails basically. So what does this mean? So there's experimental evidence that matches fossil evidence that you could basically make it so big plants can't reproduce. Doesn't mean the individuals die. You can grow to be 500-year-old tree, but you've never made a baby the whole time. Eventually you're going to fall over and there's no seedlings. Isn't that crazy? And that's only that one. So what if the forest just isn't around after a couple centuries anymore? We got 59,000 more years of eruption to go. Pretty heavy, right? I want to show you guys this because I think it's kind of cool. Here's a geology paper looking at the actual eruptions themselves. So here they are in Russia today. They've been eroding for 250 million years. So you can imagine they used to be a lot bigger than this. But like these are the lava flows themselves. And then all this green are sills, which are places where the lava was moving underground as it was erupting. But we can see that now because they're exposed today. And so like here's just like a cool map trying to show you like the timeline. Normal Siberia with sediments in it. Oh, by the way, the sediments that were in Russia that the lava moved through were carboniferous sediments full of like coal and fossil fuels. So the lava burns through and burns up all those fossil fuels as it goes through. So you get the lava coming up through. It starts to spread all over the surface. That makes the actual surface like sink down a little bit because it's heavy. And it just goes and goes and goes. And as it keeps building, the sills keep spreading farther out and this thing gets bigger. This is where most of the gas emissions are actually happening. Like some plants and animals are literally like a wall of lava, but mostly that's not what kills anything. It's like the gas emissions that are happening. Anyway, pretty heavy stuff. You guys saw this map in our lab, all the different places that those lips are visible today on our planet right now. There's those Siberian traps. This is something I want you to really also think about. 60,000 years, 500,000 years, 1 million years of time. Orange is when stuff is dying. Purple is there's still lava coming. So once these things get started, they change the chemistry of the atmosphere and the oceans and what's happening on land really quickly. But it's not like it happens and then it's over. It happens and then it just like the death is already done. And you've either adapted or you haven't, and it just keeps going. So the eruptions themselves are almost 1 million years of time, but the time that they're actually killing stuff is the first little bit. Does that make sense? I hate it so much. It makes me very uncomfortable. But it's cool for you to think about, right? There's like a bit of a almost like horror to knowing this. It doesn't stop because it's not anything. It's just the earth going freaky. So I'll let you think about that for a second. This is supposed to be Russia. I guess you're kind of close. And so all the different pressures that would be happening to different plants, different animals, different ways they would interact is really, really heavy duty kind of stuff. Where are we? Okay, cool. Back to the paleontology, back to the nicer things, back to the cool animals. So we do have loss. We also have, really importantly, I think, survival. And so I really want to talk specifically here about the 3 therapsid clades that do survive the event. Here they are kind of broken up again, because this is how we're going to talk about them next week as the Triassic radiations they are. The Anobodonts, really these ones with the tusks and the beaks called Dicynodonts, they keep going. They live all the way through the Triassic. So they make it through that hard time, and they go for another 50 million years. The Thermocephalians do survive and do re-radiate, ultimately don't last all that long. Cynodonts survive, and there's several really diverse clades of cynodonts throughout the Triassic, and one of them in the late Triassic becomes this clade that we're going to call mammaliomorphs. They're very close relatives, getting so close to us mammals, which are probably diversifying right here at the end of the Triassic. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. This is such a great figure. You are seeing Dicynodonts, you are seeing Gorgons, you are seeing Thermocephalians, you are seeing Cynodonts. This is a study where what they did was they cut the limb bones and looked at the cross-section of the bones on a microscope slide, and they could track growth rate. There's a lot of ways we can get proxies for how fast an individual animal grew during its lifetime. Blue means relatively slow growth. This is an animal that, at least when they find it as a fossil, it's been growing at least 3+ growth lines. We would infer that it's like kind of growing slowly because it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger over years. Red, it's either an adult, obviously, maybe it's not an adult, but we definitely only have 1 or 2 growth marks. So whatever it did to get to the size it is, it did it pretty quickly. Relatively fast growth for red, relatively slow growth for blue. There's the extinction. These are all fossils from the same place. They're all from South Africa, all found in the same localities right next to each other. Do me a favor, please, and answer these questions with each other and make some observations about this. This is incredible data about how animals are responding to this extinction event.
Yeah.
Die. Which makes sense. Today, what help an invasive species? Some other species are invasive, but putting this a subsidy of this you're right on what should that by the shape of the other species ways poison. So it makes sense that able to look down and must put on the I guess some walls as well. Like she's just they go on radio light resonations. Like there are a couple of take them longer, because sometimes, so I guess, yeah, especially for the reach. And the sense. And the price for writing. Yes. You know, which is like still seems that you always very much here. So that's the sort of what should I think? I don't know, it's just a great yeah, it's one of the very few.
Okay, so there's a couple things we can do here. I want to start off just really simply, just making the observations about the distributions without trying to interpret anything. What's a pattern to you guys? Yeah, Trevor.
Most of the animals that recover from the Permian seem to have really fast growth rates in the red.
How much red do you see below the boundary line? How much light blue do you see at or very near the boundary line? There's some that are close, but then they don't cross it. Okay. So what are some patterns here? What are some possible interpretations? This is really, to me, I love being a human because I love that people are thinking about this stuff and then putting it all together and being like, okay, so here's what could be happening. And everyone's like, that makes sense. Sorry, I'll call somebody else. Somebody else. Yeah, Cody.
With a faster growth, it's easier to maybe reach like sexual maturity maybe, and so you can reproduce faster, and if you can grow faster, you get to adulthood faster.
If I've got to find food and grow up and it takes me 12 years to become an adult before I have any babies, am I more or less likely over this long, horrible event to go extinct than somebody who's like, I can have a baby in 8 months? Interesting, right? So this is what we call the life history of animals, part of like how they structure their own ontogeny and then how it makes it to their own reproduction. It's, we talked about it once, it's a lot like life cycle kind of thing, but it's like the life history traits. Elephants have a different life history than mice. They also have a different body size than mice. But still, how many litters of babies can you have? Do you have 10 at a time? Do you have 1 at a time? These are all different factors that you can imagine are going to be differently impacted when there's massive perturbations like this. So what do you guys interpret with all this blue down here? Like what's going on for the blue animals in the Permian? Nowhere near this. Little Gorgonopsia indet right here is living a great life. Living and dying millions of years before there's any extinction event. So what do we make of all the blue down here? Yeah, Carmen.
It's the ancestral condition.
Maybe it's the ancestral condition. Or it's just like, you know, the level of like growing up and having babies. This is fine, like 3-4 years growing up, 5 years, 6 years, whatever. Like it's all, there's comfortable. The extinction you guys can think about is like a selective force. It's all of a sudden like, hey, now it costs you a lot to wait that long. And so you have extinction in some instances. You have preferential survival in some instances. Maybe these ones were always growing fast and they just are like fine through the boundary. This is one of the absolute coolest things I've ever seen. Mascarinus is a genus of Theratocephalian that we can track it. Its skull is its skull is its skull. The anatomy is the same. But as it crosses for millions of years in the Permian, crosses the boundary and goes into the Triassic, it changes its life history. Instead of growing up to be 6, they're having babies when they're 1. So what that animal like pulled up right on the joystick. It like did make it. Other ones maybe were evolving that way and then it didn't end up happening, right? That's really, really, really remarkable. What do we make of blue up here? There's a reason some animals are humongous and take their time investing in their offspring. Those don't have to be mutually exclusive because it's really beneficial. And so maybe when the disturbance has passed, you can kind of afford to be a little more, take your time. And so that's so interesting, right? It's not necessarily good or bad. It's not better or worse. This is what's stable before. It is suddenly not stable for a while and you have to do something different. Or if you were already doing that thing, you're fine. And then when you go back, yeah, we can have animals return to a more traditional 3, 4, 5 years to grow up before they reproduce thing, which just for a selective window of time isn't going to be likely to work. Isn't that crazy and beautiful and amazing? Yeah, Ron.
I'm saying this one lineage in the Dicynodonts, the last blue one, the
Yeah, Canamaria.
That's interesting because it implies that, hey, one lineage did manage to survive potentially with the slow growth.
This lineage, we have the great fossil here, and every single Dicynodont that's later in the Triassic is related to this one. We actually, it's like a big deal. When I go to Zambia with my colleagues, we are constantly looking for this animal because we can infer its existence via the phylogeny, but we don't have a good fossil of like the Permian Canamaria form. So that's one of those ones where like we're always like looking for it. Okay, thank you guys. And so another thing to think about is different survival strategies. Here's Mascarinus, you guys. That's a Mascarinus skull from the late Permian. This is a Mascarinus skull from the early Triassic. So you could change your life history. Mascarinus has its babies younger and grows up faster. A different thing that is obviously related is that it also reaches a much smaller maximum body size. So you can think about it like, doesn't need as much resources because it's not a big animal anymore. If you like CT scan these and look at all their anatomical details, they are identical. It's just that one is half the size of the other one. And every one you find in the Triassic is this big max, and then the Permian, sometimes they get to be this big. This is the one on the slide a couple last week or on Tuesday, kind of looked like a bear. That's like a Permian Mascarinus, and then they get smaller. So changing your life history, growing faster, having babies younger, and also just changing your body size, just being a smaller animal because it's safer in a natural selection way, maybe. We also have evidence, almost everybody who survives the event, in the South African ecosystem anyway, digs holes or goes in holes. How fun is that? There's some amphibians, maybe cheating, right? But definitely some cynodonts, definitely some of these anchyromorphs like this Procolophon. They are probably burrowers. They live in burrows. And so if you've insulated yourself from that hostile kind of volatile environment, maybe that's just one of those things that you were burrowing beforehand. Now burrowing ends up being a very cool thing to be doing because you're able to have your babies a little more safely, sleep a little more safely, take refuge from things. That's cool, I think. These different survival strategies that can help out. Any like late Permian kind of questiony stuff before we go into the Triassic here? It's really crazy to think about, right? 80-some% species extinction at this line. That's from marine animals in the oceans, invertebrates. But we see really high levels of extinction in almost everything we can check. People describe the End-Permian mass extinction, and I like think this is like one of the most beautiful, like poetic things I've ever read the first time I read it, as like the Earth is on like a skeleton crew, meaning there's like one or two organisms in each space, like shaking as they make it through this bad time. But then once you make it through, radiation happens, speciation happens, we're back to normal, and there's a whole new world for animals to go into. And so this is the Triassic. This is where we're going to spend like the next 2 weeks almost, because I like the Triassic too much. This is the first period in the Mesozoic era. This is when Pangaea is at its like absolute most connected. Even a lot of those island units are connected to the mainland one way or the other. We don't have evidence for a lot of anything else happening. All through the Permian and definitely into the Triassic, the baseline climate situation is that it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and Pangaea in the middle is getting drier kind of all the time. In the marine ecosystems, you guys saw this when we talked about biodiversity. We have the beginnings of what they call the ecological dominance of that modern evolutionary fauna. So your lobsters and your starfish and your scallops and your sort of invertebrates that look to you guys a lot more modern. Big time. Hugely important fish evolution happens in the Triassic. We'll talk about that next week. And multiple lineages of tetrapods, mostly reptiles, but not only reptiles, go back into the oceans. And we have some of these really great examples. These giant whale things up here are reptiles of animals returning to the oceans. So we're going to undo some of the stuff we did when you guys were thinking about how fishes move on to land. Now we're going to put some reptiles back into the ocean, and they're going to get fishy again, which is pretty cool. The other thing that is like the reason we have to spend so much time in the Triassic, in my opinion, is that almost all the major lineages of vertebrates you guys know today, frogs, salamanders, caecilians, turtles, crocodiles, the bird line, talking about dinosaurs. The lizard line, the tuatara, mammals are all showing up in the Triassic for the first time. These are all in different ways responding to that reset of terrestrial ecosystems that happens after the End-Permian. Some of them really close to that line in the direct recovery. Some of them it's not till a lot later, so it's a little looser. The other thing that's fun about the Triassic to me is that there's what you can almost think of as like evolutionary experimentation. Some of the like truly most bizarre animals in the fossil record are Triassic animals. Many of these lineages do not make it out of the Triassic. So you can think about the Triassic as like a lot of stuff gets tried out. Some of it works, and we call it frogs. Some of it doesn't work, and it's stuff you guys maybe never heard of before. Really an interesting thing. Really, really a really interesting and compelling time. So that's your Triassic summary slide. And for the last few minutes here, I want to show you some of these Triassic mammal relatives because we want to focus in on the other animals. So finish up Synapsida 3 here, the actual story of Synapsida, besides the mammals in the Triassic. So remember, we have these 3 lineages that survive: Dicynodonts, Thersiphilians, and Cynodonts. The story of Dicynodont survival is they are one of the animals that gives us our best insight into how the actual survival happens. Animals like this one, Lystrosaurus, are really the most speciose. They live through the boundary. The title slide for this lecture is Lystrosaurus, like looking out of its burrow. Lystrosaurus is remarkable because in the earliest parts of the Triassic, in places where you can find vertebrate fossils, Lystrosaurus can be like 70% of the skulls that you find, the skeletons that you find are Lystrosaurus. There's still 30 or 40 animals on the landscape, species-wise, but 70% of what you actually find is just this one genus, Lystrosaurus. It survives, and for whatever reason, kicks a lot of butt and lives everywhere. We find it all over the world. Does it look like a hero to you? Because it certainly is a hero, whether it looks like it or not. It's really, really remarkable. Lots of species. One little cool fun fact, and then I won't go too deep because I have to pull back, is that one of the biggest species of Lystrosaurus that we actually do think survives is this one called Lystrosaurus mckaygi, and its biggest skulls are from Antarctica. And Antarctica is connected to Pangaea. And so the story is like, is Lystrosaurus big in the Permian? And then only the ones down on the very bottom of the planet survive the extinction, and then they come up into the Triassic. But is Antarctica a refuge during all this stuff happening? Maybe. Antarctica is not an island, though. It's just as far down as you can go. And remember, the volcanoes are up here. We don't know, but it's a fun truth. Here's what I mean about Dicynodont evolution. Dicynodonts are incredibly diverse and abundant all through the Permian. These are these different pieces of time. This is like Dicynodont species. Very few lineages actually survive, but then the ones that do survive re-radiate. We get more Dicynodonts that are different and new in the Triassic. But they also go through this, what's called an evolutionary bottleneck. A lot of species, most of them die, but not all of them. And then the ones that survive, that's Lystrosaurus, they radiate. We get a couple of new ones for a long time, which is really cool. Here are some of these Triassic Dicynodonts. I'll let you take them in for a second. They're all big, for the most part, herbivores, and they go around for a really long time. Dinosaurs evolved in the middle part of the Triassic. There's Dicynodonts right there with them for like 30 million years. 30 million years of time that you got dinosaurs being dinosaurs. There's just Dicynodonts that are totally not extinct, living right alongside them. Here's one of the biggest Dicynodonts. This one was the cover of Science when it came out because it's so big. The biggest individuals are like getting to be elephant sized. They're in the late Triassic. And so here you have like an early mammal in the late Triassic. Here's a bunch of dinosaurs. And then here's just this big monster from the Permian that's like absolutely not a Permian monster. It's a late Triassic monster, just Dicynodonts. They don't make it out of the Triassic, unfortunately, but they survive and go for a very long time. Do me a favor, just because I love them so much, talk to your neighbors about these cool Triassic Dicynodonts. What seems interesting or fun?
It is gonna be complex. This is yeah. It's like balls. They're also success. It's with the that's not making sense. There is kind of like this idea of like everything in the Triassic bigger than all the things that I think it's gonna be involved in each gap, this sort of fall. Falls. I will be, yeah, it's. Well, the top. It's flat, so it's just, I guess. Very good. I don't know if there's just. I mean, I think it's maybe secret you say how it's. Please let's see. For the line. Yeah. They are sitting there.
All right, anything fun to say? Any questions? These are such great animals. I can't give them any more than this because we have so much other stuff we have to talk about, but like, yeah, anything.
It's just fun to think of like this like popular perception of everything in this era that's bigger than like a dog is like a dinosaur.
Uh-huh.
But it's not true.
Not true at all. Especially, no, yeah, I'll just say that's, yeah, not true at all. All throughout the Mesozoic, all throughout dinosaur evolutionary time, a lot of big animals certainly are dinosaurs, but like tons of them are definitely not dinosaurs. This is great. You're going to see this one again when we do talk about dinosaurs because I can't help myself, but like you'll get there. Also, again, these are synapsids. These are our cousins. These aren't reptiles of any kind. These are mammal relatives with their big beaks. This one here, Placerius, some of these other ones, these are the ones that like, it's an ongoing area of research because it's so remarkable. Dicynodonts have two big teeth, and then some of them evolve them to be actual functioning like tusks that grow over their whole life. And then these ones late in the Triassic, they completely lose the tusk. There's no more tooth anywhere in their mouth. But their actual maxilla is just really sharp, and it has like sharp turtle beak on it. And like the beak goes like this. This animal has male and female forms, and the males have just like gigantic. If a turtle had spikes that look like a walrus, but there's no teeth in there anymore. Think about what happened. Kind of have a big tooth, kind of have a really big tooth, kind of have a tusk. My bone is big for my tusk. I got a beak now. Now I got a long face. Now my beak's all over my long face. I lose the tooth. You're like, what are you doing? It's so great. It's so great. There's no teeth in you. It's fun. Okay, I got to keep well behaved. I'll just say this also. I mentioned this so briefly. I probably should have waited till now on Tuesday. The Thermocephalians that do survive, like you guys saw, Mascarinus changes a lot about how it lives its life. It stays small and it grows faster. And then the ones that do survive in the early and middle Triassic, they do re-radiate. There are new clades that evolve that are only in the Triassic. It looks small on here, but this is like 10 million years of time, which is not nothing. One of the things that's really cool, one of these Thermocephalians, this one's called Borea, definitely becomes an herbivore. It gets a really, really wide skull and its cheek teeth become really wide and it grinds up plants. And so like, think about that. In the evolutionary experimentation phase, after the bad times pass, some of these Thermocephalians are like going for something totally different. It doesn't work out long term, but it's still sort of amazing that we can track these animals doing that kind of thing. All right. Cynodonts is where we're going to pick it up on Tuesday in lecture. And so we will talk about these guys then. I won't try to rush them right now. Yeah, I think that's it. Oh yeah, here's some books about extinction in general and the End-Permian if you really care. They're already on your slides from lab, but here they are again. Okay, have a good weekend.